company, First 109th. And I was in that from 76 to 92, 93, where I did attain the rank of Sergeant First Class. I was a platoon sergeant, but Sergeant First Class is the rank. But before I even start here today, this is what I want to do. I want to congratulate the Lakeland girls softball team yesterday. And you people, right? Hey, excellent. It's nice when a homegrown group of kids can defeat an all-star team. And I say that because, you know, Bishop O'Hara, why are you going to Bishop O'Hara? I'm going there to play basketball. So it's an all-star team. We raise our own. I'm a retired teacher from Western Wayne School District, by the way, and I used to coach basketball there. I was head basketball coach, and I was always glad that Lakeland was a football school because it always gave me a win in basketball, because you guys are always in the playoffs, and by the time we played you, they were just coming off the football season. So it was a win. Not easy. It was a win. Another girl here is in the championship for the hurdles, Cassidy Jenkins from Lakeland. I know she's not here. She's down in Shippensburg. I always like to recognize those kids. And, of course, our own from Western Wayne, Rebecca Carmody and Alex Long. If I don't mention their names, the eggs will be flying next Halloween at my house. Okay? One thing about having a lot of guest speakers, it's kind of funny when the things I was going to say were already said. And I said to the other speaker here, I said, listen, I'm going to try to keep it short for two reasons. Tenny will tell you. He said, speak for a minute, and he knows that means a couple hours. And I'm a lector at St. Mary's in Waymart, and Father would be very upset if I'm not there for 4 o'clock Mass. All right, so I'm going to make sure that I try to keep this SBS, as we would call it, short but sweet. So my history of Memorial Day, I'm not going to tell you about that because that was already said. And I noticed, and I noticed you have Sea Badge, and a little story I always like to tell about the Sea Scouts on the battleship Nevada. On the weekend of December 7th, they're having their encampment on the battleship, and of course, not realizing it, the ship was attacked by the Japanese, and a lot of the crew was killed in the first strafing, and they needed somebody to bring the ammunition up from the magazines, and the Sea Scouts jumped right in. So I was telling the commander, I said, I wonder if they had some kind of, like, you know, if you're a combat infantryman, you just get the CIB or you get the action ribbon or whatever. I wonder what they gave those scouts, because I heard there was about 20 of them. Okay, well, you know, Tenny asked me, oops. You know, I really don't need one of these. I taught school for 35 years, and I taught at West Point 3 summers. I taught land navigation to the cadets. And so if any of you guys are in the Army, and if you had an officer that could never find his objective, you could thank me for that. Because a lot of them, you know, it was hard to believe they were only 18 years old at the time. But anyway, Tenny asked me to come today and speak. And he said, speak about your scouting experience and how it helped you when you went in the Army. He asked me to wear my uniform. Now, you know, I thought, gosh, I don't fit my Army uniform. I tried it on, and I can't even get the waist around my thigh, okay? And then I said, well, maybe he wanted me to wear my American Legion uniform. Well, I figure I'll wear the American Legion cap. All right, that'll kind of satisfy some of our Legionnaires out there. Because let's face it, when I got out of the Army, I weighed 150 pounds. And that was 80 pounds ago. At least I think. I have to wait till I go to the doctor to find out. And, you know, I said, Tenny, I don't think I'll fit in it. So I chose my scout uniform, first of all, because scouting was the first thing I ever did. I joined Boy Scout Troop 101, Scranton, Pennsylvania, sponsored by the Westminster Presbyterian Church. Now, you have to remember, the United States was 20 years removed from the Second World War. And that was in Korea. And you know, most of our scoutmasters, they were veterans. And their goal was to make men and future leaders. And for the most part, they were no-nonsense men. Everything they taught us has made a lasting memory. Yeah, they smoked, but who's going to tell them they couldn't? Okay? You are not going to see them cleaning off a table in the mess hall. That wasn't their style. And definitely you weren't going to see them doing latrine duty. In fact, even in our troop, A lot of times the boys, they have latrine duty, and they want to go to their merit badge classes, and they look up to me. I said, I cleaned my share of latrines. Guys, remember? Remember the diesel fuel? I'm sure some of you do. Anyway, so these men didn't do that. It was our responsibility. When they said go to bed, they meant it. And if we were fooling around, they found something for us to do to tire us out. My scoutmaster, his name was Mr. Moss, was a stickler for proper appearance, especially while you were in uniform. That's where I first heard of the famous gig line. Remember that, fellas? Right? And of course, I'd like to show you what a gig line is, but my belly's a little too big to show you. But anyway, we'd start every meeting with inspection. Shine shoes, clean hands. You better be in full uniform. We still wore leggings. Remember the leggings, guys? World War II guys? We still wore them in Troop 101. You didn't wear jeans. You didn't wear plaid shorts. You didn't wear your bathing suits, like I see today a lot of scouts do. Luckily, 265 doesn't do that. They look pretty sharp. Okay? Mr. Moss did not do the inspections. In fact, if he said hi to you, it was like a great day. Our senior patrol leader did it. Now, senior patrol leader for you guys who are military, that's like the first sergeant of your troop. They're the boss. And if you ever come up to Troop 111, you'll probably wonder what the adults do there, because we sit around and we might help a little kid, but our senior patrol leader runs the meeting. The patrol leaders run the meeting. All right? That's where I first heard of that thing called chain of command. You know, if something was bugging you, you didn't run up to the old man and say, Captain. You worked your way, your squad leader, your platoon sergeant, your first... No, not your first sergeant. We tried to stay away from anybody with a diamond, unless it was a girlfriend that had a ring. All right? You know, they taught us how to look sharp in uniform. I remember the first time, speaking to the boys saluting the flag, I remember I was 12 years old, and here I saluted the flag in my Boy Scout uniform for the first time. And how proud we were. Go forward a few years, and I'm down at Fort Polk, Louisiana. That's where I did my basic training. And here we were, and of course you heard the call to colors, and naturally we all stood up and we saluted. And I thought to myself, wow, here I am, a soldier in the United States Army. At a time when it wasn't really cool to be a soldier in the United States Army. It was 1970. But how proud I felt that I could salute the flag, just as I did as a Boy Scout, in my Army uniform. Well, we wore fatigues. Anyway, the one thing I always remember was, and I'm going to kind of speak off the cuff a little bit. I have a whole speech in here, but you know what? I see people with blankets and they're starting to fall asleep. I think that they probably heard I was coming. Anyway, I remember Memorial Day, or as he said, Decoration Day, helping the VFW, American Legion, other veterans groups, putting flags out on the cemeteries. There were so many Boy Scouts that we could get a cemetery done in a morning. And in those days, there were still World War I veterans still alive. My Uncle Frank Rossi being in the artillery in World War I. And we would sit there and listen to these gentlemen. And one thing was, we were great listeners, or else. they'd fix us. Okay? I went in the Army, and I'll never forget my very, very first pay. Remember, you used to get paid in basic training. They'd bring the whole company down. You'd line up in front of some some lieutenant. Sorry about any of you guys that are officers here. You'd line up, and of course, you'd report. You'd say, Private Cadenzi reporting for pay. Well, previously to me getting my first pay, I had spent a weekend. I was with the Order of the Arrow at the time, and before I went to basic training, I went to the Ordeal because I felt that, well, maybe it might be the last thing I might do. So, we were just scout. Well, I reported up there, and I went to the table, and I said, Private Cadenzi reporting for pay. And this lieutenant looked up at me, and, of course, you had to wait till he saluted so you could break your salute. And he looked up at me and he says, "What kind of salute is that, Private?" And they're, oh my God, right? At this point, after being yelled at, probably the second man that ever scared the heck out of me besides my father, my drill sergeant, comes running over, and he, and actually I can't say the words that they say here. Tenny, right? He told me to keep my mouth clean. He came up and he started yelling at me because I had to go to the back of the line. So I drop my salute, I stagger back to the end of the line, my drill, I'm doing push-ups and getting yelled at and doing push-ups, because that meant we would be late for something. And I came up the second time, and the lieutenant looked up at me and he goes, it's our Boy Scout. And I said, Private Cadenza, reporting for pay. And he saluted me back, and as he's counting out the money, he said, you know what? There was nothing wrong with that first salute neither. But I guess he was trying to get me in the habit of saluting like this instead of like this. Second thing I remember, in scouting we were big on the colors and the flag and putting it up properly, making sure it was to the speaker's right or your left, so on and so forth. Well, we're having a dog and pony show. This is when I was at Fort Benning, Georgia. It was an AIT. And if you guys don't know what a dog and pony show is, Secretary of Defense, probably Vice President of the United States, a bunch of generals, guys that you never really saw that much. They came, and I looked up, and because we had a little rehearsal, and the colors were wrong. They had the national colors going to the right, and they had our regimental, our battalion colors going to the left. So I'm looking at it, and one of the sergeants came over, and he goes, what's the problem? I said, the colors are wrong. Well, you don't tell a first sergeant or a master sergeant that they're wrong. So he grabs me by the collar, pulls me into the head shed, and he says to somebody at the desk there, this private says the colors are wrong. Well, they get out the D&C manual, drill and ceremony, and they start looking. Now I'm shaking. Did I second guess myself? Whatever. Well, sure enough, they looked it up and it was wrong. The national colors, naturally, would go to the left, meaning the speaker's right. Our regimental colors would go the other way. And, of course, with the national colors being on the outside. So they patted me on the back. I still had KP. I still had to do my other jobs. But before I graduated from AIT, they had a little attention orders. And, of course, the Army, one thing I liked about the Army, I don't know if it's that way in the Marines or the Navy or any of the other groups, sometimes if you do a little thing like this, doggone it, sometimes if you do a little thing like this, you get recognition. You get a nice letter, a nice attaboy put in at that time called the 201 file. And I got a letter, attention orders, that I kept the battalion from embarrassment and how I all that. And all because I think I learned it in scouting. Right? I learned how to wear a uniform in scouting. I learned my knots in scouting. I was an intelligence analyst, and part of the MOS was you had to go to jump school. Again, in Fort Benning, Georgia. You guys remember Harmony Church up there? And I was there, and of course, believe it or not, I mean, to think I was physically fit. At one time I was. I weighed about 150 pounds when I got out of the Army. But anyway, the one day they take it and they teach you knots. Square knot, sheep shank, bowling. Guys, scouts bowling, right? Bowling on a bit. And those are all because in case you get stuck up in a tree, you can let yourself down without being injured. Hopefully being injured. Anyway, so we were standing there and we're tying our knots. And this one guy next to me says, oh man, he says, just like being in the Boy Scouts. I said, yeah. And naturally, whenever I did something wrong, there was a sergeant behind me. Even when I became a sergeant, there was a sergeant behind me. I got out as an E7, and I always wish I stayed in that. Just other 3 years, I would have gotten out as a first sergeant, and then I could have yelled at somebody. But there we were talking about these knots, and we were tying them like we were scouts. And this black hat sergeant, which of course the tech sergeants were called in those days, he says, Boy Scouts, every time we're at this knot, I hear Boy Scouts. And I almost said, well, maybe you should have been one, but when I saw the size of the guy and the size of his arms, I decided to keep my mouth shut. Okay? Well, as time went on, and I got out of scouting. I became a scoutmaster. I was scoutmaster of Troop 409 in South Canaan first, then I went to 111 in Waymart. And a lot of our boys in the troop would sit around the fire, and like Tenny and I do, and the other guys when we go camping. You know, if you're veterans, you always start off with stories that are this big and end up this big. You know, we save the world. Right, Tenny, you too? You say, okay, making sure he's awake over there. He's heard my story so many times that he could probably sleep through them and then quote me. Okay? What, 40 years, 41 years we've been friends? At least, right? Anyway, so, you know, I talk to the kids and they say, you know, what was the Army like? I always told them the fun things we did, the cool things, the jokes at training, and guys who used to hang out the windows in their sleeping bags and stuff like that. Do you guys do that in the Marines too? No? Oh, you guys are more disciplined than we were. Let me tell you. But anyway, 6 boys in Troop 111 have served in this conflict that we currently have. 2 are Marines. Their older brother's a Navy corpsman. One of our boys was in the 1st Infantry Division. Another boy was in the 7th Cavalry of the 1st Cavalry Air Cav Division. And another boy was a military policeman. And when they joined up, I kind of said to myself, wow, did I paint too good of a picture to these guys? They wanted to join up. But they knew as I did, duty to God and country. Now you have to remember, back in 1970, you had all the hippies, heck no, we won't go, and all that nonsense. And to some of us, it was God and country. I'm an Eagle Scout. I think it's expected. And I myself did not wait for the draft letter to come. I joined, and because of that, I had 2 MOSs. One, I was 11 Bravo, which is infantry, and of course, I was a military. I was a intel analyst, which was a very interesting job. I was privy on a lot of things. But we're talking about Eagle Scouts and Scouts. Vietnam veterans here? General Westmoreland, right? Eagle Scout. Did you know that? He was an Eagle Scout. And General Gavin, who was with the 82nd, Eagle Scout. I wish he was there when I was tying my knots. He wouldn't have let that guy yell at me. And anyway, this weekend is Memorial Day weekend. And of course, we honor all of our soldiers that aren't with us anymore, or those who have served and have passed on. Other groups I want to remember. EMTs. They put their lives in the line all the time trying to help people that are in danger, that are dying, maybe in a car crash. Our firemen, whether you be a city fireman or a volunteer fireman, you're putting your lives in line too. Our police, as we know from last September, you know, we live in a time when there's not only international terrorism, there's domestic terrorism. And we really have to thank our police for keeping us safe. I really thank you very much. The other day at Western Wayne, I think you saw on TV, we honored the state police at Blooming Grove. We gave them an award. And we thank them. But another group, and this is something that kind of surprises people, our teachers. Any teachers here? New line of defense. I want you to think about this. Sandy Hook Elementary School, right? Columbine. I mean, who thought when those people left the house and left their kids and left their husbands and wives, that they would be facing battle? We were trained for it. Teachers aren't. Okay? A couple years ago, Oklahoma, those teachers that saved their students because they followed the protocol for the civil defense and kept them out of harm's way when those tornadoes hit. Not one child was injured or killed. So that's our new line of defense. You're our new veterans. And I say that with all my heart. I served in both. so I know. And I always want to make sure that I make mention of this. And for you scouts here, I want you to make sure that you keep your honor, God and country. Honor yourselves. Stay away from the drugs. Stay away from the alcohol. You're scouts. You know what to do. And of course, the one thing I always, service to others. All right? Think about these policemen. Think about the volunteer firemen. Think about the EMTs. That's the stuff we teach you guys. That's the stuff that was taught to me. I want to thank you people for allowing me to come today. Tenny, thanks a lot, buddy. Where's the steak dinner? Wait a second. I'll talk to him later. You know, I went down to the Marine Corps Museum a few years ago, and I got him a Knight's hat, you know, because he's my pal. Anyway, so thank you very much. It's so nice to see communities have these still. You veterans out there, Memorial Day next year, November 10th, we usually do it. Come to Western Wayne and see what we do. We honor our veterans at Western Wayne. Tenny's been there a number of times, and we hope it's an open invitation to any veteran. Believe me, you'll be treated like kings. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Our next speaker is Stephanie Collier. Stephanie was a member of the PA National Guard for 12 years. One of the things that we wanted to do that I don't recall in any previous ceremonies or services is make sure we represent the men and women in the military. So with that, I'd like to call Stephanie forward and
It was such a great feeling when I was actually able to talk to them and hear their sweet voices. But every time I would talk to my husband, he seemed down and depressed. I figured it was just because I was away. I never really thought anything of it. I came home in December of 2009, right before Christmas. It was the most amazing feeling in the world, seeing my children again. It truly was the best Christmas ever, being back home with my family. Well, Christmas came and went, and we found out in early February that we were expecting again. Our third child, Kayla, would be here before we knew it. I was so excited, but my husband didn't seem to be. In fact, he didn't seem happy about anything anymore. He was different. He became angry at the world, even with me. I couldn't understand why. He became mentally and physically abusive. I honestly didn't know what to do. I repeatedly asked him and begged him to get help, and finally in May of 2010 he did. But he would never talk to me about it, so I truly never understood what was wrong. I knew he had seen a lot overseas, then his brother getting hurt, and then me leaving I'm sure didn't help. He would never tell me what was wrong. He never wanted to go anywhere or do anything. Sometimes I wished I were back in Iraq because life was easier there for me. While he was getting help, it seemed to work. He seemed to be getting better. He started his dream job in August, working full-time for the National Guard as the training NCO. October 4th, 2010, Kayla was born. I was so happy. Everything was working out, and life was getting back to normal. Or so it seemed to be. On December 18, 2010, I was wrapping Christmas presents with my children when Joe came downstairs. He told me he was going to run to the mall to get a shirt. We were going on a date that night. I said okay, gave him a kiss, and said I love you. Joe never came back that day. The Army chaplain showed up at my doorstep to tell me that my husband took his own life. He jumped off a bridge. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I thought I was dreaming. This had to be a nightmare. Why would my husband do this to me? His children. What was so bad in his life he would do that? I asked them if there was a note, and they said no. There was a Christmas present for me in the car, but no note. Why wouldn't he leave me a note? I will never know why he did what he did. It was the worst day of my life. I knew Joe had PTSD, but he was getting help. I was 27 years old and now left to raise 3 children on my own. What did I do so wrong to deserve this? How do I look at my babies and tell them Daddy is never coming home? I thought my life was over. I knew I could not go back to my home, to our home. It held too many memories, both good and bad. I decided the best thing to do was move in with my parents for the time being, until I was able to get back on my feet. I spent 4 months, mostly in bed, until one day my mother said, "Stephanie, you can't do this to yourself anymore. You have 3 children who need you." I knew she was right. I slowly started to bring myself back. I made the decision to leave the Army after 12 years. I bought a home close to my parents, started counseling for my children, and began working as the head teller at the First National Bank in Forest City. My life was finally starting to look up. My children and I were happy again. A few years later, I unknowingly met the man who I would fall in love with, my current husband, Staff Sergeant Jason Collier. I never thought I would fall in love again, but somehow I did. It's truly funny how life works. I became pregnant with my 4th child, Liam, our first child together. It was a very bittersweet moment for me. I was happy about having another baby, but sad because Jason was being deployed. He left for Kuwait in October of 2012, and we'd be gone for a full year. It was a tough year. He was not able to come home for the birth of our son, but the hospital did let us set a computer up with Skype so he can see Liam. I was very grateful for that. Jason came home on July 27, 2013. It was one of the happiest days of my life. I knew everything was going to be okay from that point forward. Jason and I finally got married on October 18, 2014. He is currently serving in the Pennsylvania Army National Guard, and I have since opened my own business. We truly couldn't be happier. As I leave you today, I would encourage all of you to take the time while celebrating this weekend with your families to remember what Memorial Day is truly about. It is about our soldiers who have passed on, those who have been killed in the line of duty, and those who have passed away back home. Memorial Day will always hold a special place in my heart, and I hope it will in yours too. Thank you.
everyone to be part of protecting our nation. And our next person coming up is our Cub Master. And she's going to talk a little bit about our flag and why that flag is such a symbol of remembrance, and why these stories can be tied directly to our flag. So, Stephanie, if you come forward.